Hey there, everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll continue on with my exploration of Fantagraphics collection of the complete work of Guido Crepax. This volume is called Dangerous Liaisons. I think so far this one has my favorite cover. I love the coloring on here. Love the way that they've like dropped his line art into colors. I think this would be a really cool, experiment that someone could do a whole story this way with his stuff. I think it's very fitting for his style. But anyways, cover design's beautiful. It has the typical stamped in textures that I really love. Overall, these are just beautiful, beautiful books on the shelf. The stories in this volume are a little bit quieter. They're less supernatural than in a lot of the other stories. The consequence of the supernatural activities happening in other stories are still in effect in these stories, but this is more an exploration of Valentina's mindset as someone who develops sexual interests in people other than her main sexual partner, and then especially how she fills the void of Philip Neutron Rembrandt in her life as he is kidnapped, which gets covered in the previous volume to this. So some of these stories are prior to that, some of them are while Philip's missing, and then some of them are dealing with I think the most interesting ones are dealing with the consequences of her kind of having mentally moved on, and then him coming back in their relationship that way. So these are more sophisticated in that sense, but I think less like playful than some of the other work that I've seen from Crepax. This first story here is called Nostalgia. This one was done in 1980 and is pre-Philip being kidnapped. And it reintroduces a second love interest that Valentina has, a much younger fellow named Bruno, who's a musician. There was a storyline in the previous volume where a cello, I think, or a violin gets stolen, and he winds up with it. And they've met before in a previous story, and then he reappears in this story and starts piquing Valentina's interest. A kind of strange little thing that Crepax does. Something I've talked about before, where his page compositions get a little difficult to read. You have this here where it has an arrows leading you to read this way, but then you also have the two arrow tracks pushing down this way. So you kind of like read here and then come back to here and then over here, I think. But there's these suggestions oftentimes in his works that there's two tracks going on when there's not. An interesting strategy, but I think it would have worked better if he had actually had these be two things that are happening concurrently, but obviously they're not. Valentina's working on taking a photograph. A lot of the most interesting stuff going on in these stories, I think, are the interior conversations that the characters have with themselves. Like here, Valentina's really explicitly thinking about herself as someone who wants to be a cheater. She's thinking about cheating. I'm still thinking about it, even while studying geography. I didn't make love to Bruno. I could have at his place. I wanted to, though nothing has changed with Phil. What if I did something I wouldn't dare doing with Bruno? It would be like a test. A test? Well, they say if a woman is in love with someone, she should be indifferent to such secrets. So I'm thinking it is possible. Is it possible to be so complicated? I'm getting hysterical, turning into one of those crazy ladies. But if I'm thinking of doing it, it means there's actually something different so far I've never imagined. And so she keeps going on with these ideas, and she's struggling with her like sense of, I guess, like femininity and feminism. Like, is it okay to be a slut? Should that be put on to me like as a label? So I think it's a really interesting exploration of one character's struggles with their kind of instinctive morals versus the societal morals that are pushed onto them. Obviously, it's all kind of there to push forward the erotic content, but it's not there just in that sense. It's not just setting up erotica for erotica's sake. I don't think it actually is, especially given the context of the much greater story that it's put in. It's really showing the development of a character struggling with certain themes throughout her life. So I find it quite interesting. Here she starts going into her guilt a little bit more, saying, I planned this in cold blood. No behavioral analysis in such a peculiar moment. I liked it that way, that's all. But if I liked it, it means nothing changed with Phil, or that I'm a real slut, so much so that no matter what I want to be, but it's not like that. It's not like that. Whoever thinks I'm just a cat willing to show her ass to everyone knows nothing about me. So again, like this interesting internal struggle that she's having, with her own moral barometer, I guess. And a lot of that is still being played up by the fact that, she went through this traumatic experience with this underground species of creatures that she thinks she's their Mother Mary. Obviously, throughout the series, she's also just been set up as, someone who's very interested in sex. And so those things kind of coincide. But there is a like sub-dom relationship that she's exploring with this Bruno character where she's very submissive to him. And some of that seems to be, the suggestion is that she's still working out some of the trauma that she went through. I had to notice, because when I'm reading these stories, oftentimes like staring over my shoulder, why are you reading all this smut? And I'll go, check this out, this is fun. But we've both noticed that Crepax seems to prefer asses to tits, and right here you get that kind of expressed pretty well in the Bruno character. He's telling her, take off your bra too, you don't have big maternal breasts. So something that I've noticed as a theme in his art where he likes to focus, and now it's backed up in the dialogue, so I felt that was noteworthy. The second story in this is the introduction, I believe, of the Effie character. This was done in 1981 and 82, so this is post Philip being kidnapped. Effie is introduced to us through this scenario where she's been kidnapped, and Valentina finds her and kind of helps her and saves her. Valentina, this is called Made in Germany. Valentina's in Germany at this point. You can see that she's changed her hairstyle. After Philip is kidnapped, she kind of changes who she is. You can see that she's also getting older. She's in her late 30s and 40s in most of these stories, and Crepax is trying to show her aging. But one of the big things he does is he has her change her hairstyle, and that gets mentioned later on. The Effie character is at first someone that Valentina just saves and feels something for in maybe a more maternal sense, but then Effie starts to, in her attempts to sexually come on to Valentina, starts to complicate those feelings for Valentina. So at this time, while Phil's gone, Effie and Bruno and Valentina are like this love triangle of these two love interests that she's going back and forth. And they both Effie a little bit more than Bruno, I think, kind of harbors resentment for the other, so it makes an interesting love triangle. I had to point this out. I just think this is a beautiful composition here. It's strange for me to see these very large panels, these big open compositions. Usually Crepax's work is much more cluttered, so it's nice to be able to see him pull off something big and open and graceful like this. And I think it lands the emotional moments really quite well. The next story is called Fra Roselli and Fraulein Lang. This is again focused on Valentina and Effie. As Effie moves in with Valentina, they're both kind of looking for companionship. Valentina likes to have her sleep in the bed, but is trying to avoid sexual things with her. She's also questioning, like, am I a lesbian? These kind of things. This gets tied back to the Baba Yaga storyline, where Valentina did have sexual encounters with women, but at that time she thought she was like under the spell of something. So like those were, I don't have interest in women. That was something that was forced upon me. But then in this situation, she's starting to feel something for Effie. But you get this medallion here that goes back to the Baba Yaga story. And then a pretty cool sequence where Effie is looking at a Paul Klee book and noticing the similarities between the medallion that Valentina has that she got from Baba Yaga and some of the drawings in the Klee book. So this is a really interesting, just where Crepax can go in and show some of these compositions that are inspiring him, probably, even though they don't show up as explicitly in his work. And also really just interesting here, you get this bookshelf, and you get a sense that this is probably Crepax's bookshelf. He's showing off like specific lettering types, the way that the type is set on the box, things like that. Or at least he's showing like a lot of the people who influence him, a lot of the artists that influence him throughout. So that's always kind of cool, that he's willing to put his own influences on display and not try and hide them. Another Valentina and Effie and Bruno story called Andante, again looking at some art from another famous artist that Crepaux's then rendering in pen and ink, which is always really fun. And you get Valentina and Effie going out to a Marx Brothers movie, and then you can see them. I really like these big, these are something that's influencing me a lot. These big, like Klimt like almost compositions where the figures are entirely covered by the blanket, and you just have these small heads popping out there. And that's again showing that they share a bed together, but they're kind of struggling with the sexual nature of their relationship. At the same time in the story, Valentina is also seeing Bruno. So here she's going to see Tristan and Isolde, and he's a musician playing in the band there, I believe is what's going on here. Or maybe he's just there to see. I wasn't quite clear on that. But they run into each other at a play. And so now you get that love triangle, really, the tension of the love triangle activated there, where Effie in particular seems a little jealous of Bruno. In this scene here, you see Effie looking through a magazine, and it has a picture of the old actress Louise Brooks that Valentina is based on. She's a real-world actress that Crepax based Valentina's look on, and Effie mentions it to Valentina. Oh my God, you look so much like her. And she said, you should change your hair. You should go back to the way that you had your hair back then. So she's reminding Valentina of who she used to be, who she really is. And Valentina starts struggling with like, yeah, I'm not who I have been without Phil, and so like she's thinking about, should I do the haircut or not? But eventually Effie kind of prompts her into bringing back that haircut and going back to the original Valentina look. And she starts to feel like she's recovered some of herself in that. And then at the end of the story, she's really struggling with these feelings of maybe being sexually interested in a woman for a first time explicitly. But she's really pushing back in that in an odd way for a story that seems so open-minded about polyamory, bisexuality and all of this stuff, especially thinking these are done in 82. I think that would have, I don't know about in Europe, but if this had been coming out in America, this would have been pushing the boundaries pretty far. But here she says, I don't want to become an old lesbian either. The horror. You can experiment when you're young, but you shouldn't take it too seriously. So for someone who's pretty sexually open, Valentina's still struggling. And like I said, I don't know what the culture in Italy around homosexuality would have been at the time, but it seems to be something, probably the Catholic upbringing that I see in a lot of this. She would have been struggling with that, or Crepax himself would have been struggling with that, since fascism and Catholicism seem to be at the core of a lot of the psychological things going on in these stories. The next story in the book is called Far from Berlin. This is done in 1987-88, but in story it's happening in 1985. Phil is back, but Valentina's still kind of juggling her feelings for these other characters. She hasn't seen Effie in a while, but we're reintroduced to Effie in this story. She's having like a series of assassination attempts on her life, and you remember from the earlier story, someone had been trying to kidnap her when Valentina met her. I gotta say, I didn't quite get a clear sense of why in any of these stories. Maybe I just missed something, but I'm not sure if I've seen all the Effie stories, because I wasn't quite sure why someone was trying to assassinate her. And then Valentina is also encountering this character, Vincenzio, who she seems to be having this kind of sexual interest in as well. That he's kind of this really masculine guy that might, but aggressive. And she says, or kill me, you might gracefully seduce me. So they're playing this weird, tense game. But Phil is back in her life. Then in the next story, The Thieving Magpie, this one's from 1988, and it's set in 1988. Now Valentina and Phil are really back together. They're struggling in their relationship a little bit, though, because Effie is representing herself. And even though Phil was cheating on Valentina while he was gone in America, kidnapped, He's struggling with the fact that he knows that she basically was also having these affairs, even though for her she thought he was dead and gone, whereas he knew she was still alive. So then you get into Phil's interior state, but also Valentina's state as she's still trying to work on these things. This story also leads up to a possible reunion between Valentina and Effie. What happens is the thieving magpie that the story is named after steals a roll of film off Valentina's desk that has pictures of herself on it, and then somehow brings it to Germany from Italy, and just happenstance leaves it for Effie to find. So there's like this cosmic connection between them then that's being brought back up. Also, Grandpa's having a lot of fun drawing birds throughout this volume. I'm having to be careful about which pages I show, but there's some pages where there's something I can't show on YouTube over here, and then these beautiful drawings of birds throughout the volume, which I really enjoy. These are just some, more mild versions of that. The next story is called An Acute Observation. Now Effie really comes back into Valentina's life because Phil is seeing some photos that have been taken of Effie recently, and he's starting to realize that his power that he used to have with his eyes to freeze people either in person by staring at them or staring at them through a television screen, that's now changed or expanded to being able to see through images and see through time in some sense. And so in these images of Effie, he's seen these assassination attempts that are being brought upon her. And so Valentina and Phil set out to go save her from this, and that reintroduces her to their lives and then adds the interpersonal complications of Phil struggling with Effie being back. On their trip, to get Effie, they go to Africa, and Valentina is basically going on assignment in Africa to get her work to pay for it, but that's where Effie's at, I believe, for some reason. And so you get all of these where Crepax, it almost feels like he's doing the Sergio Topi thing where he's trying to go and draw other cultures and pick up on the cool clothing and accessories they wear, but not quite as successfully as Sergio Topi. And this one feels like a bit more, I guess because Valentina has the camera, it feels more like Orientalist in nature, where it's more just going in and looking at the other. So a little bit different vibe than Topi's work. But it's interesting to see Crepax in that different mode, because usually he's doing these either very like high fashion, 60s through 80s fashion, or he's doing like Victorian era stuff. So it's fun to see him draw some other things. That ends the Valentina material in this book, and then we go on to the two adaptations, which I really have a hard time showing any images from because they're explicitly translations of very explicit erotic material. So that's what the content is about. The first one is the Memoirs of Casanova. This was drawn in 1976. Quite like the opening sequence, and really happy with both of these. When I've seen some of Crepax's other literary adaptations, I feel like his formal playfulness with comics goes out the drain a little bit. Here you can see that he's really still doing a lot of the musical subdivisions that I really like throughout the compositions. Having this centered composition split here, and then you've got these bars in thirds that are lining up here, and then you have this here split into thirds. You have this proportion kind of flip-flopping. I guess it's a little shorter here, but then these lining up with the gutters here. There's just all these little subdivisions throughout. And then again here you get this split into fours, and this splitting this in half, and this lining up right here. This leads you right down to the drop of the letter. So there's a lot of these just kind of subdivisional forces happening in these works, splitting this in half, that I think are really interesting. And then particularly interesting when this character takes the grid down. This seems to be like, these are all the boxes. These are the kind of things that people must fit into. And when she takes this down, she's opening the window. She's opening the door for Casanova to come in and kind of work outside of the moral boundaries. So it seems like he's using the formal musical subdivision play that he normally uses to also have this very subtle underwriting thematic kind of content to it, and I really like that. But this is the kind of stuff that anytime I look at Crepax, having the gutter go right down into this, that just really tickles me, and it's stuff that, you know, I'm definitely stealing quite a bit right now. And then the second adaptation is a 1983 adaptation of a book called Venus in Furs. This is one of the few pages I can show from it, but you have this character here who's kind of this weaselly little wormy guy who just wants to be abused by his wife, I guess. They signed a contract, and it's a hardcore sub-dom relationship where she's the dominant figure and he's the submissive figure, and she treats him like a butler and slave all day, and he has these kind of really over-the-top BDSM fantasies where she's like shoving the heel of her shoe up his asshole and all these kind of things that, to me, this is the stuff I'm not such a fan of. I have no problem with eroticism and, you know, sexuality in comics, but I've just never found the dom sub stuff particularly interesting. It seems like it's coming from a unloving, unhealthy place, but that's just, you know, my gut instinct about it. If that's what you all want to do, have fun with it. But yeah, just not my type of content. I know the next two volumes that I have are almost exclusively that kind of content, so I'm not even sure I'm going to make videos on volumes 7 and 8 that are explicitly the erotic stories, because I know there's more adaptations, but I'll have to read them all. I'll have to see how kind of grotesque the sexuality gets in it. But like this, like pumping air and flames up people's asses and putting shoes, and the guy backs himself up onto the leg of a chair and that kind of stuff. Not really my thing. But it is interesting that it's still not just that. It is a character study of someone in this mental state. I know it's based on a book written by a guy who actually was in a contract like this, I guess. So it is an exploration of the psychology of that state, at least. It's not just pure excuse for pornography, you know, pretty sadistic pornography at that. So in that sense, it's interesting, but not really for me. But you still get some of these very, very beautiful drawings here. I don't know where it's set, but my guess based on this is that it's in Prague. This looks like the type of Art Nouveau architecture that I remember seeing a lot of in Prague. So it definitely has a different kind of feel to it as well in terms of setting. Still like Victorian-ish, but with this Art Nouveau kind of twist to it. So there are a lot of really nice visual things in it, but just reading material is a bit hard for me. The Eisner nominated The Strange Death of Alex Raymond by Dave Sim and myself. This is a gorgeously illustrated and designed book. Dave doing most of the illustration. Amazing compositions throughout. What Dave is doing is he's recording his obsession with the death of master cartoonist Alex Raymond behind the wheel of Stan Drake's car when they got into a car crash. The best description of the book that I've heard is that it's like understanding comics with pages like this, mixed with something like From Hell when you get into the theories about, you know, what actually happened with the car crash. And then with Sean on production, it's just one of the most gorgeously printed books you could get a hold of.